When most people imagine the American Revolution, they picture a united people rising with confidence, marching under a new flag toward freedom. But the truth is far darker and far more fragile. There were countless moments when the entire revolution came dangerously, close to dying before the idea of the United States ever took shape. By the winter of 1777 at Valley Forge, Washington's army was starving, freezing, and bleeding deserters by the day. Soldiers wrapped rags around their feet because they had no boots, leaving red stains in the snow. Supplies barely arrived. Congress was powerless and broke. To many world leaders, America already looked like a failed rebellion waiting to collapse. Britain believed the uprising would burn itself out, and European empires quietly hoped it would because the success of a democratic experiment threatened the old world order. A victorious America would inspire revolutions across the globe, weakening monarchies and empires. So when the revolution faltered, foreign powers watched closely, some even encouraging the failure, knowing a fragmented, defeated colony would keep North America under European control. Washington understood this pressure. Every decision he made carried the weight of a nation not yet born. A single disastrous retreat, a few more desertions, or a harsh winter week without food might have crushed the revolution. Yet survival came not from guaranteed success, but from stubborn resilience. Washington reorganized his troops, pushed discipline through hardship, and held the line long enough for French support to arrive at a turning point no one thought possible months earlier. The revolution survived by inches, by chance, and by extraordinary human will. Had it collapsed, the United States, its constitution, its culture, its global influence would never have existed. The world map today would look radically different. In this near-fatal moment, America wasn't the superpower we know. It was a desperate collection of colonies clinging to a dream that almost flickered out before it had the chance to shine. It is hard to imagine the capital of the United States, home of the presidency, Congress, and national identity reduced to flames. But in 1814, during the War of 1812, that unimaginable sight became reality. British troops marched on Washington, D.C., brushing aside American resistance and entering the city with almost no opposition. By that evening, the White House, the Capitol, the Treasury, and nearly every major government building were ablaze. Smoke turned the sky black. The young nation was humiliated, terrified, and unsure if its government would survive. What made America vulnerable wasn't just military weakness, it was division, political chaos, and the belief among European powers that the United States was still too young, too fragile, and too disorganized to stand on equal footing with empires. Britain targeted America to crush its rising influence and reassert dominance over North America. If Washington fell permanently, the psychological blow might have shattered national unity. Many feared the government would scatter and states might break apart. Some American leaders even wondered if the country could once again fall under European control. President James Madison fled the city carrying vital documents, unsure whether he would ever return to lead a functioning government again. For a brief, terrifying moment, the United States seemed on the edge of collapsing back into colonial relevance. But the burning of Washington had an unexpected effect. It ignited national fury. American morale surged, turning humiliation into determination. Volunteer militias strengthened defenses in nearby cities. The assault on Baltimore soon after failed dramatically. The British realized America was not the fragile experiment they believed it to be. The capital burned, but the country did not fall. Instead, this near destruction became part of America's evolution, a moment when survival itself forged unity. Had the government collapsed or the British stayed longer, the United States might have fractured into smaller republics, ending its journey toward becoming a world power. During the Civil War, the United States didn't just face rebellion, it faced the very real possibility of total national collapse. By 1862, the Union Army suffered disaster after disaster: Bull Run, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. Each defeat chipped away at public faith that the Union could survive. Newspapers predicted collapse. European powers, especially Britain and France, watched with predatory interest. To them, a divided America meant a weaker hemisphere, easier trade control, and no single force capable of rivaling their global influence. Some European leaders considered recognizing the Confederacy, which would have given the South legitimacy and likely forced the Union into negotiated surrender. America's enemies didn't need to invade, they simply had to wait for the country to implode from within. The Union economy strained under the weight of war, desertions grew. Draft riots shook major cities. Lincoln faced assassination attempts and political pressure to accept a divided nation. A single Confederate victory on Northern soil might have ended the United States as we know it. Gettysburg changed everything, but not because victory was guaranteed, rather because defeat there would have been fatal. European powers were prepared to intervene if the Confederacy won decisively. Instead, the Union's survival at Gettysburg kept foreign influence out and preserved the possibility of reunification. America's near destruction during the Civil War was not merely an internal battle, it was a global opportunity seen by rival empires. A broken America would have remained 2 or 3 smaller, weaker nations, none capable of becoming the superpower the world knows today. The Civil War wasn't just a struggle for unity, it was a moment when the fate of America's global future hung on the edge of defeat. In 1918, the United States faced an invisible enemy, one that couldn't be stopped by armies, diplomacy, or borders. The Spanish flu swept across the country with terrifying speed, striking soldiers in crowded barracks, workers in industrial cities, and families in rural towns. Hospitals overflowed. Doctors collapsed from exhaustion. Coffins ran out. In just a few months, more Americans died from the flu than on every battlefield of World War I combined. The country was already stretched thin by war demands, food shortages, factory pressure, military drafts. But the flu created a deeper crisis, a collapse of confidence. Entire towns shut down. Schools, churches, theaters, and businesses locked their doors. The government struggled to keep the war effort going while trying to hide just how badly the nation was suffering. And while America fought for control at home, foreign powers watched the chaos with interest. Germany, knowing the U.S. military presence tilted the war, saw the flu as a silent weapon it didn't need to fire. If the outbreak crippled American troops, the Allies might collapse. German propaganda began spreading conspiracy theories suggesting the U.S. was lying about military strength, hoping to weaken morale and sow division. Countries hostile to American influence viewed the epidemic as a rare chance for the young superpower to fall into disarray. If the U.S. fractured under fear, the war's outcome could shift dramatically, and America might emerge weakened on the world stage. Inside the country, confidence wavered. Trains stopped running, businesses shuttered overnight. Cities ran out of police, nurses, and teachers. Panic replaced order. And just when it seemed the crisis might break the nation completely, American resilience surfaced again. Volunteers turned homes into makeshift hospitals. Communities fed one another. The military reorganized, kept recruiting, and continued deployment. The flu eventually subsided not because the U.S. was prepared, but because the country refused to collapse under fear and confusion. It was a near miss that could have devastated the nation politically, socially, and militarily. Had the death toll climbed even higher, or had the epidemic lasted longer, the United States might have lost the war abroad and stability at home, changing the entire future of American global power. The Great Depression was not just an economic downturn. It was a national crisis that threatened to unravel the foundations of American society. Between 1929 and 1933, the stock market crashed, banks failed by the thousands, and millions found themselves jobless with no safety nets. Breadlines stretched around entire city blocks. Families lost homes overnight. Ordinary Americans hoarded food, fearing the system itself was collapsing. For a time, capitalism looked like it might not survive. Around the world, foreign governments watched with growing interest. Totalitarian regimes, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan saw America's desperation as proof that democracy was weak and unstable. Some actively targeted American public opinion with propaganda, hoping to influence the country toward isolation, extremism, or political fragmentation. If the U.S. government failed to restore stability, global authoritarianism might have spread, and American influence might have permanently declined. Inside the country, extremist movements grew rapidly. Communist and fascist factions gained momentum, promising radical solutions to economic despair. Hunger marched across the nation. Veterans stormed Washington demanding promised payments. Some advisors believed the crisis could spark a second civil conflict. The U.S. banking system nearly disintegrated. If just a few more major banks had collapsed, the entire financial network would have followed, plunging the country into chaos. What saved America was not certainty, but bold action and sheer determination. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal rebuilt confidence, not overnight, but piece by piece. Jobs programs, bank reforms, new protections for ordinary people. Yet even these steps were fragile experiments. Many feared the U.S. government would run out of money. Many worried the public would lose faith entirely, but America held on. Foreign nations miscalculated. Instead of collapsing, the U.S. emerged from the Depression with stronger institutions and a clearer national identity. But the vulnerability of this era cannot be overstated. For several years, the United States was hanging by a thread, one economic shock away from losing its global role. The Great Depression remains one of the closest moments the U.S. came to internal breakdown, a reminder that power can evaporate faster than it is built. On the quiet morning of December 7, 1941, the United States woke to an explosion that echoed around the world. Japanese aircraft descended on Pearl Harbor with surgical precision. Their mission clear: destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet before it could challenge Japan's growing empire. The attack was not just a military strike, it was an attempt to rewrite global power. Japan believed America was a sleeping giant, wealthy but unprepared, divided, and unwilling to enter a long war. If the strike delivered a knockout blow, Japan hoped the U.S. would be too shocked, too fractured, or too fearful to respond. The goal was simple: eliminate America as a Pacific threat for decades. The attack nearly succeeded. Battleships burned. Thousands were killed or wounded. Communication systems collapsed. The fleet's destruction left the U.S. Navy temporarily blind and crippled. For a brief moment, Japan controlled the Pacific. Had American aircraft carriers been in port that morning, had fuel reserves been destroyed, or had Japan launched a second wave, the U.S. military might have been set back years. This vulnerability was exactly what rival nations hoped for. Japan saw the U.S. as the main obstacle to its expansion. Germany quietly celebrated, believing the blow might distract America long enough to allow Hitler to dominate Europe. Inside the U.S., shock turned into fear. People questioned how such an attack could happen. Military leaders wondered if more strikes were coming, perhaps even an invasion of the West Coast. The government scrambled to respond, fearing the country wasn't prepared for a global conflict. For a moment, America felt exposed in a way it had never experienced before. But just as in earlier crises, this moment of near destruction transformed into something else. Rage replaced paralysis. Factories converted overnight, millions enlisted. The nation united with a determination the Axis powers had underestimated. Pearl Harbor was meant to cripple the United States. Instead, it woke a giant that would ultimately shape the future world order. In October 1962, the world came closer to nuclear annihilation than at any point in human history, and the center of that danger was the United States. When U.S. reconnaissance discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida, every major American city on the East Coast was suddenly within minutes of destruction. Washington understood the stakes instantly. A surprise Soviet strike could decapitate the U.S. government before it had time to respond. Military leaders prepared for invasion. Nuclear forces went on high alert. Entire families built bunkers, unsure whether the next sunrise would come. Why did the Soviet Union risk this? Because targeting America directly was seen as the fastest way to balance global power. Khrushchev believed the U.S. had gained too much influence after World War II by placing missiles in Cuba. He hoped to intimidate America, protect Castro's regime, and gain leverage in Europe. The Soviets knew the U.S. feared communist expansion. They also knew that if America appeared weak or indecisive, other nations might abandon U.S. leadership. During 13 agonizing days, one misunderstanding, one miscalculated military encounter, or one panicked decision could have triggered a nuclear chain reaction. American generals pushed for airstrikes. Soviet commanders in Cuba prepared to launch nuclear weapons if invaded. The world held its breath. The US Navy surrounded the island, stopping Soviet ships carrying more weapon components. A single miscommunication could have meant millions of deaths. Inside the White House, President Kennedy and his closest advisors argued desperately over the best course. Hawks demanded a show of force. Doves feared global extinction. At one point, a Soviet submarine commander nearly launched a nuclear torpedo, believing war had already started. Only the refusal of one officer prevented catastrophe. Finally, diplomacy prevailed. The US secretly agreed to remove missiles from Turkey, and the USSR withdrew theirs from Cuba. The world stepped back from the edge, but only barely. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a moment America could have ended in fire and ash. Nuclear war was not an abstract threat. It was minutes away. The entire Cold War afterward was shaped by this near miss, a moment when the planet survived by luck, restraint, and a handful of decisions made behind closed doors. In 2008, the United States faced a collapse unlike anything in modern history, not a foreign invasion, not a nuclear standoff, but a quiet implosion from within. The financial system, the engine of American global power, began to fail piece by piece. Mortgage markets collapsed. Major banks teetered on the edge of ruin. The stock market crashed. Millions lost homes, jobs, and life savings. For the first time in decades, Americans questioned whether the economy they trusted could collapse entirely. Behind the scenes, federal officials admitted they were hours away from a full-scale banking failure. If more institutions had collapsed, ATMs could have shut down. Businesses would have gone dark. Paychecks might have stopped. America's position as the world's financial leader hung in uncertainty. Foreign rivals saw an opening. China used the crisis to expand influence across Asia and Africa. Russia saw a weakened America as an opportunity to challenge NATO and reassert dominance. Some nations celebrated the idea of a declining U.S. economy, believing it would shift global power in their favor. Economic warfare, currency manipulation, market speculation, and strategic investments became tools to capitalize on U.S. instability. Inside the country, panic spread quickly. Families lost everything. Major corporations collapsed overnight. For many, the crisis wasn't just financial, it was emotional, psychological, and generational. The belief that America was economically invincible died. And yet, just as in previous moments of crisis, the nation refused to fall. Emergency reforms stabilized banks. Stimulus efforts kept businesses alive. Slowly, painfully, the U.S. recovered, but the warning was clear. Even the most powerful nation can come close to breaking from within. The 2008 meltdown exposed the fragility of the modern world, how interconnected systems can topple in days, and how America's global leadership can be shaken by forces that require no armies at all.